Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Today, we are joined by Commissioner Kevon Martis, who is a Lenawee County Commissioner, but kind of wears two hats right now. Also one of the, I guess you'd say, driving forces or originators behind a ballot initiative that's out there that MAC has recently joined, called Citizens for Local Choice. Welcome, Commissioner Martis. Could you tell us a little bit about what Citizens for Local Choice is looking to do?
Well, sure. We, as MAC's position was as well, strongly concerned about then, I guess, House Bill was it 5120, now Public Act 233, that has really taken away any meaningful local control of wind, solar, and battery storage regulation from the counties and the townships, and has basically placed it in the hands of the MPSC. So that's a very troubling pattern. We felt there's strong opposition to that. We know many counties sent resolutions opposing the legislation, including those that have a lot of renewable deployment in their jurisdictions. And so we've taken the approach that the people should have a vote on this, and we're trying to place a repeal of that local zoning preemption on the ballot this November.
Yeah, I know that was something we were very active with. You mentioned the Townships Association as well. When the legislation was getting passed, we provided a variety of different options to the legislature to kind of maintain that local control. Local control is something our association, of course, has talked about for many years, whether it's zoning in regards to renewable energy or aggregates or you name it. We consistently are battling local control being taken away, and I know that's where our board came in and said, "Hey, if we're not going to stand for local control, what are we doing here?" And that's where I think the board decided to come in and say, "Hey, we really want to support this initiative." So tell me a little bit about specifically what does the initiative do?
Well, we're introducing a piece of legislation, citizens-initiated legislation, and that legislation targets only the local zoning preemption. And so that's our effort. We're not touching any of the energy policy side of this. This is strictly a question of who decides how to cite these things, the MPSC or local units of government. And so we have an extremely narrow focus, and as a result of that narrow focus, we have a very big tent of people from all sides of the political spectrum, from hardcore mega Trumpers to Democrat environmentalists, all working with us, all with a wide variety of opinions on renewable energy. But we're all united really on just this one thing. This is a decision that should be trusted to the local people, not by essentially unelected bureaucrats.
Yeah, so let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about process. When we're talking about a ballot initiative and the type of ballot initiative you folks are working on, what's the time frame goals that we're looking at here between now and what end date?
Right. Well, we've been clear from the beginning, this is a heavy lift, and it certainly is. We were able to successfully get our petition language approved in their first meeting. Other groups who were trying to do similar things have met multiple times and have not been successful. We felt that was our first serious hurdle, was to get good language approved the first time out, and we did that. Then, unfortunately, the Elections Bureau took a number of weeks to get back and approve our final form, which obviously was not the output we wanted. But in the meantime, we've now, so the process then is we have 180 days to get 357,000 signatures. But because we want it on the 2024 ballot, we actually have to have this done by May 29th. Presuming we get the signatures, then the legislature, and they're certified, the legislature will then have, I think, 40 days to decide whether or not to take this law up themselves. Seeing it was a party line vote, it seems very unlikely that they would act to adopt this during that time frame, and then we would then push to get move forward to the election cycle.
Right. So the first kind of goal is this May 29th date to get those 357,000 signatures, probably shooting for a number higher typically, right? Yeah, 550 is the real number you're looking for. Not a lot of time there. And then legislature comes in, can either adopt it or ignore it, and then it goes on the ballot, correct?
That's right.
Or they potentially could adopt and amend it, right? They could sit there and say, hey, we're going to adopt this language, then go and amend the language they adopted, which could potentially lead to a watering down or changing or whatever the case may be, whatever the legislature may do. What happens in that case?
Well, we'd have a couple options then. If they adopt and amend, we would have the right for a referendum on that, which is a much lower signature threshold. And my understanding of it right now, and I'm not an expert on every phase of election law, but you would have 90 days, but that's from sine die. So it would actually give us more months to attempt something like that. We got our hands full with what we're doing right now. We certainly pray we don't end up in that position, but the energy I'm hearing from the rank and file folks in the state are that we need to continue to push forward in this matter.
Yeah, so a lot of moving parts. So as far as groups that have joined, I mentioned MAC. What other groups have joined the initiative? Larger groups?
Farm Bureau was an early joiner, Michigan Farm Bureau, which is very significant, particularly since some of the proponents of this legislation paint this package as being very pro-family farm, pro-agriculture. Well, Farm Bureau has made it clear that the majority of their membership doesn't share that position. Our efforts are certainly not anti-agriculture in any way. It's, again, just a question of who decides. But a number of townships and counties have been very concerned about the impacts on agricultural production by converting large tracts of prime farm ground into power production. My county, Lenawee County, is a leading producer of corn and soybeans and wheat. And we are looking right now at 15,000 acres of solar just in my commission district. So people have a concern about that. But to get back to the other supporters, of course, the Associated Builders and Contractors have joined us. They have a different concern about the legislation than we're a big tent. Their concerns are really about some of the prevailing wage requirements and those kinds of things that the legislation brings. That's their membership's focus. Township Association, then of course, and yourself. So yeah, it's a good group.
Yeah, quite a range there. And I know our organization has gotten over 40 resolutions supporting local control in some way, shape, or form in the zoning process. Again, going back to what I said earlier about how important local zoning is to our association. We have, I think, 20 counties or maybe even a few more than that do local zoning. So it is something that's important to us. So what are some of the opposition to this that you're hearing out there?
Well, one of the big arguments is this is about property rights and farmers, and I say farmers because this is where the bulk of these projects are cited, though in many cases these parcels are not even owned by agricultural interests, they're owned by hedge funds and investment groups and so forth, real estate speculators. But the opposition is, well, this is about property rights. Shouldn't anybody be allowed to do whatever they want on their own property? Well, our answer, or my answer anyways, rather than speaking on behalf of the broader coalition, I am a zoning administrator, certified zoning administrator, so I understand this argument. If we just passed a law that gave everybody the right to do whatever they want on their private property, I'd actually be more sympathetic. But in truth, this only applies to a narrow slice of landowners for only a couple types of technology. The truth is, and people who are county officials who are involved in land use and zoning know that none of us who live in a zoned community have the right to do whatever we want with our private property. And so some of the things we hear from the folks on the street is, why does my neighbor get to build these large power generation structures and skip, really, I mean, yes, there's some language that pays lip service to a local approval process, but the bottom line is the developers will be advocating to go immediately to the MPSC for this. Why can they do a large scale power generation project on their property with limited local input, yet I may have to go get a variance to site a yard barn or a shed in my backyard? Everybody likes zoning rules when they apply to their neighbor, and they don't like them when they apply to themselves. And so this is not unique in that regard.
Right. That zoning argument's been around forever, right? Hey, it's my property, I should be able to do what I do, but zoning's there for a purpose, right? There's input in that zoning process locally. And back to your comment on the parameters of the legislation that was passed at the local level, there's significant limitations on what the local unit of government can do in that zoning process. And if the reality is if the local unit doesn't follow those specific rules within the legislation, developer could just bypass essentially the local unit of government and go to the MPSC for approval, correct?
Well, that's absolutely right. As I've heard several legislators who I've been sharing their town halls with say, you do have a right to speak locally as long as your answer is yes. And that's really the way this is. And in NPSC, my reading of the legislation too, they don't have much latitude to deny a project either. Really, the only variable that they could consider is an adverse impact on agriculture, but of course, there's no definition. And the second they try to apply that rule, there will be litigation on the behalf of the developer for that. So, look, local control is not perfect. We understand that. Everything has warts. But my position is local control of land use is the worst solution, except for all the other alternatives. And that's really where we're at. We're not being unzoned. We just now have zoning for these land uses being done by a distant entity that's not directly accountable to the local electorate, which is a problem.
Yeah, right, right. Well, is there anything else that I didn't cover that you'd like to cover today?
Well, I would just say, first of all, we really appreciate Mac's support in this endeavor. And, this thing rises and falls by the petitions. And I would say Mac has 619 commissioners in their membership. My strong recommendation to them is if each of you go out and fill 1 or 2 pages of signatures, each page is 12 signatures, that makes a meaningful difference in our efforts. And with 90% support out there among the rank and file folks, including Democrats and Republicans, there's a very low rejection ratio for people being asked to sign these. So, that would be my message. Let's take each other hand in hand and let's keep going.
Yeah, great. Thanks again for joining us again. If you support local control, this is very important, a very important initiative to get involved with. Our association, our board specifically, voted to support it based on the local control aspect, and it's something that we've long talked about. So thanks for joining us today, Commissioner Martis, and look forward to hearing about the initiative as things move down the line.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.